Hello everyone, welcome to our review of the surprise indie shmup release, Drainus. And I know what you're thinking, wait, that's not how you pronounce this game's title, which is true, but I'm not going to go an entire video calling this game Drainus.
That's gross, I love it.
I think that's a horrible localization mistake, and so as the CEO of the Electric Underground, I am taking executive action, and I'm renaming the game Drainus, at least for the purpose of this review. Like Gradius? Drainus. I think they should have gone with that. Instead, they should have got me on the advisement team. I could have told them Drainus was a bad idea. But anyway, so what's really cool about this release is that basically it came out of nowhere, at least from what I am aware. I'm not sure if there was any insider information among other shmup players, but for me, it just popped out of nowhere. And just looking at the trailer and screenshots alone, I knew, okay, I'm going to have to cover this game on this channel because visually, this game is absolutely a step forward. It is the step in the right direction. We have a lot of conversations on this channel about how do we expand the genre, where do we go, where do shmups need to go, and a lot of people out there sort of seem to think that the way to go is to really change up the mechanics fundamentally, maybe mix in other genre elements into it. I think that's all well and good, but I think the real answer, and the one that I always push, is kicking up the visuals. Make the visuals just better, bigger, sharper, more enticing. That alone will push the games onto the next platform because in my opinion, shmups are one of the few genres where the gameplay elements are still very pure and beautiful, and I wouldn't want to lose that quality too quickly in the name of popularity. So I think the most obvious and safest route is to push up the visual style, which Drainus absolutely does. That being said, the big question is, how does the game actually play? Because it doesn't seem, from what I'm able to observe from this developer's history, that they have too much experience making shmup. Now I have to put an asterisk next to everything I say about these developers because every time I try to talk about some Japanese developer's history, there's some secret lore behind them that I'm not aware of, and then I get in trouble with that in the comment section. So I will say, from what I'm aware of, it doesn't seem like this studio has made many shmup in the past, and so this does seem like a bold new effort, which I think is a great sign for the genre, honestly. So coming into it, I do want to make a few statements before we get into the meat of the review, which is I'm going to be somewhat critical of this game because that is my job as the reviewer, but this doesn't mean that I think it's a bad game or you shouldn't buy it or you shouldn't recommend it. This seems obvious, but at the same time, I think there's just this natural defensive reaction where, you know, I like the game, I dig the game, so I don't like when reviewers start smack talking it, and that's not my intention, but I do want to make everyone aware of the full spectrum of the game, of both the good and the bad. So let's begin with the good, the stuff that really stands out that I think is very forward thinking, because as you'll see from my title and thumbnail, I think this is a very fun and interesting game to discuss on the channel, because at times it is both intensely brilliant and is doing things that I think are very smart gameplay wise, and I think other developers should honestly learn from and maybe even implement into their own games. And it also has some sort of basic fundamental mistakes and errors that seem like, okay, if you were a little bit more experienced as a developer, you'd be able to anticipate these issues. But at the same time, I do feel like they are repairable. They're not fundamentally flawed issues. It's more of a concern with balance and that sort of stuff, but we'll talk about that as we go in the review. So let's start with the positive, which is, I think if you are a beginner shmup player, if you have friends that are somewhat interested in the genre, but they can't quite connect, especially in terms of difficulty and frustration with level design, and, oh, it's boring, all I do is shoot and bomb and I need more. All of that stuff is what Drainus has in mind, because for a newer player and also for experienced players, I think the first 2 hours with this game are going to be a great time. I think if you buy this game, you fire it up, your first 2 hours playing Drainus are going to be an excellent time. I think the game is sort of designed around this idea because it does a lot of things that are really cool the first time you play through it. It has a lot of interesting mechanics, it has a lot of visual flair, it has a really fun, interesting shop system for if you're into that sort of stuff. I mean, it's really bringing a lot to the table for newer players and people trying to get into the genre, but they need that hook. That being said, it also has a lot of unique elements that sort of are unto itself. So it can be kind of a situation where maybe they get into this game, but they can't quite move over to other games as easily. The first element that's going to be obvious is the bullet shield absorption mechanic. Actually, the main gameplay of this game, I don't know if it was intentional, but it really reminds me of two indie shmups, and they just smashed them together. So the first indie shmup that comes to mind is a recent one, Shield Made, which has this bullet absorption mechanic, pretty similar to this actually, but you ram into a bullet in that game, and this activates your bullet absorption shield, and then you go around and you absorb bullets, and you kind of do that in this game as well. And then the other game that it really reminds me of is Devil Engine, where you have this sort of parry absorption mechanic. Burst, I think it's called. I can't remember what the name of it is, but it has a mechanic very similar to the shield mechanic in this. So you put those two mechanics together, and bam, you have Drainus' main gameplay system, which is you fly into enemy bullets that are energy based rather than physical missiles or walls or whatever. You fly into them, you absorb them, and then you release them. And not only does this protect you, but you also can use this as a form of attack. And when you release it, you have this sort of homing charge attack. That reminds me a ton of Crimson Clover's homing charge attack. So it's pretty cool how many elements this game is bringing together. And it does seem like this team, even though they might be inexperienced in some areas, are definitely very mechanically familiar with the genre. And it's a lot of fun because when you're looking at the game, it immediately kind of seems like a bullet hell style game. And I know a lot of newer players struggle with bullet hells, but the thing is, it's really not a bullet hell all that much. It's a bit like Ikaruga, where once you start to see the bullets as absorbable and your brain starts to fire on, oh wait, this isn't a pattern I need to dodge, it's a pattern I need to absorb, then the level design and everything becomes more clear, and it becomes much easier. Emphasis on much. A lot of shmups that come out and they're really centrally focused on this main idea of, okay, we're gonna have this main gameplay mechanic and it's gonna be the anchor of the gameplay. You can either go the treasure route, where it's very well designed, it's very well implemented, it's thorough throughout the entire game design. Everything in the game is perfectly crafted around this main mechanic. Or you can go the Euro shmup route, not to be mean to Euro shmups, but that's sort of the hallmark of the Euro shmup, is it has this main mechanic that it really wants to push forward, but it doesn't design the game around that mechanic at all, or doesn't balance the game around the mechanic very well. So what would often happen in like a Euro shmup, for example, is let's say they had this absorption mechanic in it, but they get too finicky, they get too passive, and so you're not really using that absorption mechanic all that often. It becomes sort of like a special move or something. And then the majority of your time playing the game is just this bland experience with little highlights of, okay, this is fun. What I'm happy to say is Drainus does not run into this problem. They realize, okay, the game revolves around this shield mechanic. Let's utilize this to the max. And in fact, they have utilized this mechanic so well, just watch Jamer's replay, that you can just straight up go through levels only using the absorb and release attack and not even shooting a shot, at least early on. And the game rewards you for doing that. And so the game design around the central mechanic is extremely solid, and I think it sets it apart from my concerns of it being kind of Euro shmuppy, because whenever you see a shmup with a very central mechanic like this, it makes me a little nervous, because if they don't balance it all throughout the game very thoroughly, it becomes awful and becomes annoying and stupid. So they did a great job there. And then another big mechanic of this game is the shop system. And so what's funny about Drainus is when you look at it, man, it's got a lot of red flags if you're on the watch out for Euro shmup territory. So Euro shmups, they got a very central mechanic, check. Shop systems, that's very Euro shmuppy. Or Euro shmups are often associated with shop system. It's got a shop system. The thing though is that what separates the Euro shmup from the well-made shmup, I guess you could call it, is not the mechanics. And this is something that might be helpful for people, because I think when people hear my discussions about Euro shmups, they think that I'm being just very specific about, oh, I can't have this mechanic, I can't have that mechanic, no shop, no this or that. That's not actually what I mean when I talk about Euro shmup, and I hope that's what other people don't mean. It's that these games are not fundamentally balanced. It's just you're throwing ideas into the genre, but you don't recognize the basic foundation of what you need to bring to the table to make the game good without the mechanic, or to make the game work all throughout. This is why developers like Treasure are so rare and so talented, because not only can they come up with innovative mechanics, but they also understand the foundations of the genre deeply, and so they can implement those mechanics in very meaningful, deep ways that even experienced players in the genre can really appreciate it. And Drainus, for the most part, is able to make this work. It's very solid level design. I'm actually very impressed with level design. There are a few issues here and there. For instance, my biggest issue with the level design is it's a little bit on the cinematic side for my taste, where it takes a bit too much time with moving between enemy waves. I think this is one of the many symptoms of the developer being a bit newer to the genre and maybe not as experienced with the genre, because I think they're a little too merciful and a little bit too blasé with the player's time in between enemy patterns. There are moments there where you are just sort of hanging out, or it's taking a little bit too much time to show off the graphics in the background, which are fantastic and they are worth showing off. And so, like I said earlier, the first time you play this game, the second time you play this game, the third time you play this game, maybe even, none of this is going to stand out to you as issues, because it's just a great time because it's showing you these cool visuals. You're like, wow, that's impressive. I get what you're doing here. Problem is, though, as you play the game further and further and further, as you start going for scoring routes, and we'll talk about the scoring system, or maybe just playing through it again and again to level up your ship, these decisions start to wear on you a little bit, and they start to degrade over time. And that's something you have to be very careful of with arcade games and shmups. Is as cool as it is to add in a lot, visual flares or little fun sequences, you need to remember that this is not a standard RPG style game or a mainstream style game where people play it once or twice and return it or never play it again. Shmups are meant to be played over and over and over and over, like a CD on loop. For example, let's say you buy an album, and the album has this funny little skit in the middle, like Kanye West, for example, College Dropout, that has these little skits in the middle. So the first time you listen to College Dropout, it's fun. It's like, oh yeah, these skits are fun. Maybe the second time you're like, oh yeah, the skits are fun. The 80th time you listen to College Dropout, you're like, skip, skip, skip. These goddamn skits are, getting old. And so that's kind of how it is with shmups. You really want all killer straight through. And I think there are a few moments in this game. They're not heavy, they're not excessive, but I would say I would have liked to see them tighten up a little bit, because the runtime of the game is pretty damn long for a shmup, especially when you do the full 2-loop sequence. I remember first time playing through, it took me 4 hours to do normal mode and hard mode, and not because I was struggling, but because the game is literally 4 hours long if you play it twice. So it is a bit on the long side, and I think that could have really been trimmed down. The second critique, though, and the much bigger one, is the game balance. And I know I'm not alone here. The game is not super well balanced. The thing is, for newer players or people just getting into the genre, this may not be a big issue for you. But for more experienced players or people who want to play the game over and over, the game is too easy. It's just that simple. The game is too merciful. It is too kind. And normally I do like developers weighing on the player's side. That's a thing, because fundamentally that is a good idea, because it makes your game much more replayable and enjoyable as you increase the difficulty. The only issue is the difficulty of the game doesn't really increase all that much, normally speaking. So the normal mode, I cruised through that no problem the very first time I played. Hard mode, because I'd already played through once, I had an even easier time in hard mode, because I understood, okay, this is how the game works, this is how the shop system works. So I cruised through that even easier. I think I had like 14 extends by the time I cleared both loops of hard mode the first time I played it. Granted, I've been playing a bunch of R-Type, but still, it seems like, okay, the game was much, much too easy. And after you clear hard mode, you unlock arcade mode and ridiculous mode. And so when I played arcade mode, I'm like, okay, now the rubber's gonna hit the road. Arcade mode, this is where it's gonna keep track of my scoring. This is where it's gonna, give me a real rough time. Nope, not an issue at all. Cruise through arcade mode. And so then that left ridiculous mode. And ridiculous mode is very interesting. And I have had conversations about it with Jamers, because ridiculous mode is basically the developer said, okay, let's turn up the rank or whatever it is, the max. Let's have it so you take one hit and you die, and let's actually increase the difficulty a lot. But it seems like, even from sort of the messaging, when you look at ridiculous mode, is that the developers didn't really balance the game because maybe they weren't capable of balancing the game at this difficulty, or they weren't interested, and maybe they thought it was like a bit of a meme. The funny thing about it, the most ironic thing about it, is ridiculous mode for veteran players is the mode to play. It is the mode you probably should play because you're going to be cruising through all the other modes. But in ridiculous mode, now all of a sudden it turns into like a Topeland Truxton style game where one death and you are in for absolute hell. And the reason for it isn't necessarily the patterns, it isn't necessarily the level design, it is merely the balancing of the power-up system, how the recoveries work. And so, in my opinion, the base difficulty of ridiculous mode is actually perfectly fine. Like the way the game runs, the plays, the idea is that you take one hit and die, all that's perfectly fine. The issue with it is just simply balancing it so that if you die once, you can recover. And there are certain items that you can buy to recover and all that. But even still, it's just very unbalanced as far as sometimes you're flying through, and if you're fully powered up, it's really not all that hard. But in the early sections where you're not powered up, you're not really engaged in the shop system fully, you're having a rough time. And the weird part of the balancing in ridiculous mode, and I asked Jamers about this and he confirmed it, is that because of the shop system, it actually gets easier later on. But I could see it being easily fixed or patched or whatever they needed to do if they were interested in doing that. So that's sort of my assessment of the fundamental flaws of the level design and of the difficulty, and I think this is the standout concern with the game. Like I said, if you're not too concerned with high difficulty games, or if you're just wanting to find a shmup that can breeze through difficulty-wise, or you're more interested in sort of engaging with the mechanics or whatever it is, I don't think you're going to have too many issues with the game on those regards. And the patterns are a lot of fun, the upgrades are a lot of fun. But there are a few more things I want to comment on. The biggest thing that stood out to me as really smart, which is funny because it's kind of a small detail, is the speed up system of this game. I think this is very forward thinking. I know Boghog really liked it because in his games he always talks about including weapon wheels for the shmup, and this has something like a weapon wheel for your speed up. So in the past, if you wanted to speed up your ship, you either had to do two things, where either you map it to one button, and it's kind of awkward because then you have to cycle through all the speeds if you want to go back a speed, or you have to always constantly be cycling through the speed. Or the other alternative we've seen, you have a second button that can go up and down like a gear shift on a motorcycle, but now you have two buttons dedicated to just speeding up and slowing down, and kind of lose track of, okay, what speed level am I on now? Wait, where was I before? You can introduce some gauges or whatever, but it all seems very unintuitive. It all seems a little bit choppy. This game solved the issue. So I love the speed up system of the game, where instead you hold down the speed change button, and then like a dial appears next to your ship, and you can shift up on the dial, and it has number indicators of where your gear is or how fast you're going. So you can roll through it and see, oh, okay, I want to go max speed. Here's the max speed number. Oh, I want to go lower speed. Here's that speed number. And then what's also cool is that it allows you to change the speed for your concentrated fire, which I don't know if this has been done before. I don't know if I've seen it before, but it's brilliant and I loved it. So my default setup was kind of interesting because rather than going like cave style, where you have a really, really slow and then a really sort of medium speed, instead what I did full speed, regular speed. So I was just hauling ass regularly, but whenever I had dodging, I did medium speed, and that made the ship feel really versatile and fun to play. And I think this system is brilliant, and I really want to see more shmups doing this. Not only having the sort of spinning wheel rather than having the buttons, but also being able to change both your concentrated speed and your regular ship speed. I think that was all very cool. My issue with the speed wheel, though, is that I really wish it didn't allow you to roll over. I think that was a mistake, and again, something they could patch. Where, for instance, if you're going from 7 speed to 9 speed, you hit up, now you're on 9 speed. But sometimes maybe, you're in a tense situation or you need to make things happen quickly. You hit the up one time too many and it rolls over to 1. And 1 is basically just your ship doesn't move. It's so slow, your ship just stops. So that can get you into some real trouble where you're trying to dodge a pattern and speed up at the same time. And as you're doing so, you accidentally roll up into the lower speed. Then you end up getting killed. So I really wish they just capped it. So basically you hold up until you hit 9 and then just stop rolling. And so then this brings us to the shop and weapon system. And I think this is going to be an interesting topic because on one hand, I like the way they did the shop system as far as the way you purchase upgrades, the way the upgrades sort of progress, all of that, because I know players really dig that sort of thing. And they did a pretty good job balancing it, I will admit. That was my big concern where, these can get really unbalanced and weird and an issue, but it seemed pretty well balanced as far as what things cost, what they did, how they upgraded over the run, how it matched the level design. That was big because a problem with these RPG Euro shmup type elements is the balance of the difficulty. Because if you don't balance the level around the shop system super well, you either get into situations where you're super underpowered, you're getting owned, or you're in situations where they really, really are stingy with upgrades. And so it's not that you're underpowered, but the levels are underpowered. So you're just on this boring, dull, you're shooting everything with a pea shooter, but they're shooting you back with pea shooters. But at the end of the game is when your ship actually works and you actually start firing stuff. I like how in this game, they power you up pretty significantly early on, and then they just keep making you more and more OP as you go. So I really like that, especially in the second loop. The second loop, your ship is just straight up OP. But an issue that I do have with the shop system is that you kind of need to be aware of what's good when in order to have a successful run. Because if you spend too much time like upgrading things that aren't that useful or aren't that powerful or aren't necessary, and you sort of miss out on the more obvious good upgrades, which I did the first few runs, you can get yourself into some hot water in the boss fights and other types of things like that. So it does reward you for learning the routing and learning the shop system along with the routing. But I'm not a huge fan of that with the shmup. I wish it was a little bit more guided. Like it gives you a sort of recommended upgrade route, right? It's like, oh, hey buddy, this is like the intended upgrade route and you can deviate, but we're just giving you a clue. Okay, this is what you do just for a standard upgrade route. That way, the first time you're playing through, you're not sort of guessing, oh, is this good? Is that good? How do I do that? How does this system work? For instance, I went through like the whole first loop, not understanding you could upgrade your shield bar. And so once I realized, oh shit, you can upgrade your shield bar, I wasted so much of my vials or money or whatever it is on other dumb bullshit when I should have been upgrading my shield bar. So I do wish they had a little bit more guidance with the shop system in that regard. But my biggest issue with the shop system is the way it is integrated into the gameplay because of the pause menu. I was not aware that you could actually on the fly buy things and change your loadout, which is cool in some ways, but in other ways I think it is awkward as hell and clunky as hell, especially when you start playing ridiculous mode. For example, there is an item that powers you up by using bomb. So after you die in ridiculous mode, this item is basically essential to get you back on track with power up, so you need to use it. But in order to switch to it, you always need to pause the menu, go in, swap to the item, unpause, like Resident Evil 4 style, and then once you use it, then you need to pause, go back to the menu, then change to your normal bomb or whatever bomb you're using before, and then play the game again. And every single time you need to pause, go ahead, upgrade, unpause, do your bomb, then you die, oh, pause, you swap over the weapon, and then swap back. Like that aspect of it is incredibly clunky. And the pause menus aren't exactly that snappy either. They kind of take a little bit of time, and they're not that snappy as far as the UI, right? You have to go into the menu and into the sub menu, then you have to select that, exit out. I mean, there's a lot of menuing going on in the game, and so I would have liked to see a more elegant solution. And it seems kind of odd that they didn't have one, considering they had such an elegant solution for speed up system. So you think they could have integrated some sort of like weapon switching thing, like a button where if you hold it, you can pull up like a weapon swap menu that's really quick and you can just swap out the weapons or something like that, because the whole pausing the game and unpausing the game felt very clunky to me. There's got to be a way you can weapon swap, maybe have a preloaded loadout, and you can't have all the items on your weapon swap wheel, but maybe you can have like 8 of them. They have 8 directions on the gamepad or whatever, so you could have 8 different options to swap through. Something, because I think the pausing and unpausing menu is awkward and clunky. So all that being said, what are my final verdicts of Drainus? Well, first of all, I do think you need to check the game out. You do need to pick it up. It's not super expensive, and it's bringing a lot of new, interesting ideas to the table that are worth checking out. Whether or not you are a fan of this sort of style of shmup or not, I think it is worth your time checking it out. And everyone I've seen playing it seems to be enjoying it. I know Jamers was having a great time with Ridiculous mode. I think that mode is made for Jamers because maybe he's firing it up and he's like, yes, a mode that makes me bleed a little bit, because I was playing Ridiculous mode and I was slapping my head on the freaking TV because of how unbalanced it was and it was driving me crazy. But still, it is a nice boost in difficulty and probably the best mode in the game. But if you're not as concerned, the hard mode is also pretty good to go with. So overall, yes, check the game out. I do recommend it, but with a word of warning, if you're wanting a more in-depth, challenging experience that's balanced well, probably not the game for you. But if you are more interested in exploring the great visuals, great bullet design, level design, with some unbalanced elements and kind of funky shop things going on, I think it's a great game to pick up, and I do recommend it. Hope that helps. Adios, everyone.
So thank you to the $5 patrons: Anthony A., Anthony Iodice, Aaron Solis, Asa Davis, Ben, Orgy22, Brian Shiver, Chris Yusufovich, Chronic Burnout 3, Cook Some Soup, Corey Mark, Des Audio, Darkwing, Darren Griffin, Disco Stas Leia, DJ420, Praise It, Eric H., FCK, Full Set, Retro Schmupper, Hausu, Kiwi, JLab, JBRPG, Jim Knockham, John Kelly, Jolts, Gameboy Guru, K, K2, Kikoman589, Larridge, Malaise, Mark Toms, Matthew Derekis, Maz, Megadeth859, Minong, Mechalin, Michael Stum, Mitch LY, Queen Charlene, Nathaniel Davis, and Electron, Neon Dagger Games, Googles, Phil Mason, Radocat, Raul, Real Skeen, Riff Mason, Rolf015, Scanline City, 7 Overdose, Shane Sinsiensky, Shmup Junkie, Space Votuous, Stadium Arts, Steve Fiction, Super Snip, The Boot Rex, The Real Ikuzo, The Dirty Screech, The N1, The Old Bensta, TRM, Zugumo, Twilight EX, X20 Spec, and Utakaya. Thanks for watching.